And by default, I figured they would tell you.
After a week of making movie reference jokes that no 14-year-olds got the entire week, I'm very happy to say what said that. It's like, we wasted the good surprise on you.
Yeah. It's every year of the new CFC, so.
I was like, the old iteration was an admin board, so we didn't actually have to meet in person or not, we didn't have to do any of this. And that was pre-correct,
That was pre,
yeah.
so I think mid to late my first year season, it's like this stuff. Which would be a full 4 plus whatever years. That's right.
That during COVID. I think.
Add that to D 97, just like a service of.
We're good to go.
We're good to go.
Yep.
Okay. All right, I call to order the Community Finance Committee meeting for June 15th at 6:30 p.m. Can I get a roll call?
Mr. Rodriguez,
Here.
Mr. Brisman,
Here.
Mr. Davis, Mr. Imhoff,
Here.
Dr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Kohler,
Here.
Dr. Madigan. Here. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Odell,
Here.
Mr. Specs. And Mr. Cargay here.
Right, that brings us to item 2. Any public comments? You guys don't spend on that.
None.
No, okay, nothing, no in the crowd. That brings us to item 3, approval of the April 21st. Specs down here at 6:35. April 21st, Community Finance Committee meeting minutes. Can I get a first and a second?
The minutes from April 1st, 2026.
Michelle, second?
Yeah.
Any changes to the minutes? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, no, motion carries 4-0 then. That brings us to item 4A, the preliminary budget for fiscal year 27.
Great, and before I turn it over to Brian to go through our presentation, I just want to point out when we talked about our budget and projections of beginning of the school year. This year we had targeted about $400,000 in annual savings for this year upcoming as a to stay within our fund balance policy. There's been comments made at board meetings. We went through a kind of a pricing exercise, we call it, or budgeting exercise with our various departments here. And we put the question to them on, if you had to reduce your budget by 5%, would it come from? There wasn't a demand that we were cutting budgets 5%, but we just wanted to get the wheels turning and see what kind of efficiencies we could find in the budget. Brian did a tremendous job working with all of our individual departments, with those answers. And I think that is reflected in the numbers that we see in the preliminary budget. So with that, Brian, I'll turn it over to you to walk through, but just wanted to set the stage a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. As budget season rolls around, this is one of the items in the committee's charge is to review the district budget before we get to the point where the board gets their first look and the publication goes out to the community of the tentative budget. So this is our annual June look at kind of the first draft. So tonight's presentation is actually the first of 3 formal presentations that occurred during the year. After we gather feedback from CFC tonight, we'll present the tentative budget to the board at the committee of the whole meeting in early August. That same night is when they authorize putting the full budget on display for public viewing. And then when we get into September, there's a public hearing held where community members can come in and comment on the budget. and the board adopts the final version of the budget that same night. So when compiling the budget, District 200 uses a zero-based budget methodology. And that basically means that each year we start the budget at zero, and we require a rationale to be provided for all budget dollars that are being requested. And that holds true for all types of expenditures, whether we're talking about salaries and benefits associated with a staff position, or a request from a division budget manager for services or materials. They provide information to us substantiating those requests. Then on the revenue side, our annual tax levy dictates a substantial portion of the budget. But then there are other sources of revenue that do involve some estimates. Usually those are based on demographic and economic information, such as enrollment, interest rates when we're talking about investment income, and then also grant awards that come from the state and federal government. All right, so let's get into some of the details of the fiscal year 27 budget. And starting off with revenues, again, our property taxes make up about 75% of the district's overall budget. Those are driven primarily by the tax levy that was adopted by the board in December. So if you go back to some of the levy discussions we were having in the fall this past year, the CPI for the 2025 levy was 2.9%. But the district opted to utilize a recapture mechanism that essentially added $700,000 to the levy. And that recapture was about 1/3 of a $2.1 million balance that could have been levied for under the tax cap in previous years, but was not because the district at the time was in possession of a larger fund balance. So when we add in that recapture amount and an estimate for new property, the approved levy wound up being a 4.4% increase over the prior year. Then there's a second type of tax revenues included in the budget called corporate personal property replacement taxes, or for short, CPPRT. These revenues have kind of been a focal point in past budgets the last few years, mainly because of the fluctuations that have occurred in that source of revenue. And you can kind of see that in the chart here. You know, revenues were abnormally high coming out of the pandemic. But then after sort of a 2 or 3 year stretch like that, they sharply declined over the next couple of years. And now we've sort of seen them level off around $2 million per year for our district. Sometime over the summer, the Department of Revenue will come out with an estimate for CPPRT for the next year. So that is probably a month or month and a half away still. But for now, our budget is assuming a 5% drop in revenue for CPPRT next year to be conservative. We don't tend to see many substantial changes in our other local revenues from year to year, but the one exception can be interest income. Even though interest rates have remained favorable, our budget for interest income is predicted to be 60% less than a year ago. And that's mostly due to having less cash available to invest, which you can see in the chart on this slide. Starting about 5 years ago, the balance had been gradually coming down, but we had a brief infusion of cash in fiscal year 25 from our debt certificate issuance. Then as we spent the proceeds from that debt certificate issuance in fiscal year 26, we also transferred over $40 million of fund balance to capital projects to help pay for Project 2. So that lower cash balance that we're looking at for the end of this year and going into next year means that the district is now much more dependent on the property tax distribution cycle for investment purposes. And what I mean by that, to kind of illustrate this, In an ideal world, taxes come in, twice over the course of the year, and we purchase investments after getting those taxes with the maturities that are staggered over generally a 3 to 8 month period based on the fund balance we're currently carrying. So that helps the district adequately cover its monthly expenses until the next batch of taxes arrives. However, as we're all very well familiar with now, those plans can be quickly derailed when we have disruptions in the tax cycle. So we're coming off a year where there was a 5 month delay in property taxes last year. Cook County has already announced that this upcoming fall, they expect tax bills to be at least 2 months late again. So really that means two things for our district. The first is it delays when we can buy investments because we're forced to dip further into our reserves to cover that shortage in revenue. And then secondly, when the taxes do arrive, the investments we purchase have to be shorter in term because we're constantly protecting against this possibility of the next installment of taxes being delayed. So really it just kind of carries forward, twice every year where we're just waiting on the taxes in order to invest our money. But when the money comes in, it's a shorter investment period till the next set of revenue is supposed to arrive. And really, more liquidity in an investment portfolio means that the budget for interest income is more susceptible to interest rate risk in the market. In other words, there's a greater risk surrounding the 1.5 million we have budgeted for interest income next year, because if interest rates change significantly before the next round of taxes are received, then our income will be reflected. We'll have to adjust one way or another, depending on whether the rates go up or down. Then one other local revenue item of note is that we are anticipating a 5% increase in the combination of food service revenues and student fee revenues for fiscal year 27. In food service, the additional revenue comes from pricing increases built into the contract with D97, as we provide daily meals for their district. Student fee revenue is seeing a bump as a result of greater student participation in advanced placement exams. So next year's state revenues are expected to be inflated because of a $3.5 million grant that was secured by the Imagine Foundation as part of their fundraising commitment for Project 2. This grant has been an interesting one because we first found out the money had been earmarked for our district when the state of Illinois' budget was approved 2 years ago. So our budget in each of the last 2 years assumed that we'd be receiving portions of that grant as Project 2 progressed. However, there's been a very lengthy process of first waiting for the state to actually make the funds available, then going through a separate application process for the grant, and then waiting again while the application was under a lengthy review. Fortunately, the grant agreement was finally approved about a month ago. So that does give us a higher confidence level that we will actually start seeing some of this money in fiscal year 27. So that has been included in the budget. A similar situation could be on the horizon for federal revenues. The district's geothermal project was eligible for tax incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act. Our contractor on that project estimated that the incentive could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million. But as you would expect, there are a lot of compliance matters involved with obtaining that incentive. So that's making the exact timing of when the district will receive those funds a bit uncertain. For now, it's looking like a May or June receipt date is considered the most likely scenario. But it is possible that revenue could be delayed until fiscal year 28 if certain milestones aren't met, such as when the geothermal system is placed into service, when the tax return can be filed, and then obviously how quickly the IRS processes the payment. So that is definitely one item that we will be closely monitoring over the next few months on the revenue side of the budget. So to kind of summarize the items from the last few slides, we've got total revenue budgeted for fiscal year 27 at $121 million. And then the figures called out in the blue box indicate this would be a 12% increase from fiscal year 26 budget. The majority of that increase is attributable to that one-time infusion of state and federal revenues that are associated with the Project 2 grant that can be found on the other state sources line. And then the geothermal tax incentives are located within this $11.5 million budgeted for federal sources. And here we just have a side-by-side comparison of the district's budgeted revenues by source for next year versus this year. Ordinarily, there's very little change in these charts because of the high reliance on real estate taxes for funding. But in fiscal year 27, we do see the impact of that state and federal revenue shifting a larger share of the overall budget into those particular pie wedges in the chart on the left. So that brings me to the end of the revenue portion of the budget. I'll just pause here for a moment and see if there are any questions.
On the budget timeline slide, it says August 19th. That's a Wednesday. Is that supposed to say the 20th?
Jump back there real quick. Yes, that is the date that the notice actually appears in the newspaper, and we publish in the Wednesday Journal. So yeah, so a Wednesday would be correct for that date.
I had a question about where those two big chunks of money for the construction projects get deposited to. Do they get deposited just to the ed fund or to O&M, or where are those targeted to be put?
Yes, we are putting the state grant is going into the capital projects fund, since that is similar to the Imagine Fund donations, where we're using it to offset Project 2 expenses. And then the geothermal rebates is actually budgeted for the ed fund. Since we've pretty much completed the geothermal project and we were funding it in advance from reserves in the operating funds, we're now going to use it to essentially pay back the operating funds.
Thank you.
So I'll ask a quick question on the revenue topics. Page 4, this is more of a comment, but the way the county used the term recapture, that's just super confusing. I think this is really a levy deferral recovery. It's a recovery of a partial levy deferral. That's still not perfectly wordsmithed. Someday we'll get there, but that's my observation about that. Slide 6 regarding the tax incentives for the geothermal. A couple of years ago when we approved that project, the big question mark was the survival of those particular tax credits. But what I'm interpreting from page 6 is that now the question of survival isn't really at issue. What's really at issue is in which year is the revenue to be recognized. Do you agree with that description, Brian?
Yes. All indications are based on when our project started. We are essentially grandfathered into those incentives, even if they were to expire. The main question, as you said, is timing, and then the exact dollar amount, because there's different tiers essentially as to how much you can get reimbursed.
I could share my district's experience. We did a couple solar array installations with an IRA rebate that went online fall of 2024. We just got that money a couple months ago, so it was about an 18-month time frame for the turnaround of the federal incentives.
Great, thank you. That helps.
That's all the questions.
All right, we'll jump back ahead here to slide 9 and move into expenditures. So within expenditures, I'll start with personnel costs. And a new contract with the Faculty Senate was just recently ratified at the last board meeting. So that did not make it in time for me to weave it into the numbers in tonight's presentation. So I do still have estimates currently in place there, but that will be updated for the next version of the budget. Aside from that, and any open positions that are still being hired for, all other district salaries have been approved at this point. Our total salaries budget is currently at an increase of about 3%. The budget for employee benefits continues to be impacted most by the rise in health insurance costs. The district's insurance year aligns with the calendar year rather than the fiscal year. So our budget currently reflects 6 months worth of premiums that we know the amounts on, and then there is an estimate in place for the premiums that will go into effect on January 1st of 2027. For now, we just use the assumption from our financial projections that there'll be an 8% increase on January 1. Again, that is, that is pending a lot of information that will be coming our way here very soon. Preliminary conversations regarding our insurance renewal are slated to begin next month. So that assumption is obviously subject to change depending on how the district's claims experience is currently tracking. On the plus side, the employer contribution rate for IMRF is expected to decrease in 2027. So that will generate some budget savings for us. Overall, the employee benefits budget is increasing a little over 4%. But our fiscal year 26 expenses are currently running under budget. So this is one area that I plan to look at again over the summer once we close out fiscal year 26, just to see if there's any assumptions in there that we can adjust to be slightly less conservative, or if it was more of a one-time blip in our savings within that area. The supplies and materials budget is decreasing in fiscal year 27. This category gets heavily influenced by the bookstore's instructional materials needs. And it just happens that next year is one of those years in the cycle where we have fewer textbooks that are due to be replaced. So that works out in our favor for this year's budget. Also within this category, the district entered into a new electricity contract with a lower rate that takes effect in January. So both of those items are expected to provide us some budget relief. The equipment budget is remaining flat next year. Normally about 2/3 of this budget pertains to technology. So I do want to give credit here to Eric Hackle, our Director of Technology, as he's done an excellent job managing and staggering the device refresh cycles for all the technology we have across the district in an attempt to smooth out our expenses from year to year as much as possible. So that was mainly what enabled us to keep a flat budget there. Then construction will remain a major component of next year's budget with over $21 million expected to be spent. I'll talk a little bit more about where that money is going in a few slides, but As of today, all ongoing projects continue to be running within the budgets approved by the board. So that is obviously good news. And then in the last bullet point, the district will have its annual $3 million of debt service payments to make, and that is on the Project 2 debt certificates. So one area of the budget where we continue to see growth is in our special education expenses. Particularly that's within the purchase services and the other objects category, which houses tuition expenses for our outplaced students. You may remember this was a major talking point in last year's budget, as both the district's special education population count and the types of services needed both increased significantly last year. In the chart on this slide, you can see those cost increases between fiscal year 25 and 26 for tuition, room and board, and transportation, which are kind of the three main cost centers we see with outplaced special education. The fiscal year 27 budget is calling for additional resources in all three of those areas again. Our number of outplaced students is expected to rise again. And although the increases are not as high as last year, they're still substantial. We're seeing 11% for the combination of tuition and room and board, 8% for transportation. So those increases are outpacing the assumptions within our financial projections. And then it puts, a little bit of added strain on other areas of the budget as a result. Aside from our outplaced student costs, there's also a need next year for additional vision and hearing services and one-to-one student aids. And again, those are both to address student-specific IEP needs. Our special ed department is still currently determining how many aides will be needed for incoming freshmen. But because of the difficulty we sometimes have in hiring for those positions, the budget does include a placeholder for next year for contractual services in case we need to utilize a staffing agency to fill them. We did have that happen this year as well. So we wanted to work that into the budget again next year as a potential contingency. When taking into account all the items on this slide, we're looking at a total budget increase of roughly $1 million. Now, the district does recoup some of those expenses from the state, but it's important to remember that all reimbursements are prorated. So each dollar of expense that we have may only result in somewhere between 50 and 80 cents of revenue for us the following year. Here's another side-by-side comparison, this time for expenditures between next year's budget and this year's budget. As mentioned before, construction expenses, which is this purple wedge, are still making up a significant portion of the overall budget at 17%. But that is a drastic change compared to what we saw in fiscal year 26 when they were all the way up to 39%. So as a result, we do see salaries and benefits together coming in at 60%. So we're starting to get a little bit closer back to that normal education industry average that is typically 65 to 75% for salaries and benefits. All right, then on slide 12, we have the numerical summary for next year's budgeted expenditures. Our operating expenditures are projected to be about $98 million. And then the addition of construction and debt service brings the total expenditure budget to about $123 million. The section that's circled in blue shows that the budget for operating expenditures is increasing 3% from the previous year's budget. And then comparing the budget to where we think fiscal year 26 expenses will end up over in the rightmost columns, we're looking at about a 5% increase. Now, here's where, based on the time of year we're at now, I like to point out that June is a very busy month for both our payroll and accounts payable departments as they're trying to close out the year and get everything, paid from the correct fiscal year. So we'll likely see some fluctuation in those percentages between now and the end of the month. But once we close the books on fiscal year 26, we'll be able to refine some of our estimates in next year's budget accordingly. All right, this slide provides some more detail on the district's spending for construction and debt, and then how those expenses will be funded next year. So we're only a few months away from reaching substantial completion on Project 2, but it always takes time, especially with projects of this magnitude, to fully close out the projects and make the final payments. So the district does still have about $14 million remaining to be paid from next year's budget related to Project 2. Meanwhile, the board is currently in the midst of determining whether design work should move forward for the third Imagine project, referred to as Act 3. So the budget tentatively includes a placeholder for architectural design fees related to that project. But again, that is still pending board vote before those expenses actually become a reality. Then there is also a $6 million budget for annual improvement work under our 10-year facility maintenance plan. Next year's projects include some plumbing and lighting upgrades in the building, some window replacements, and then some tuck pointing. Now that the proceeds from the debt certificates have been exhausted, funding for all of these projects will come primarily from fund balance. The Capital Projects Fund will start the year with about $7 million remaining from this year's interfund transfers, but additional transfers from the district's operating funds will be required next year as that construction work progresses. The budget also accounts for $5 million of external funding sources. That consists of donations from the Imagine Foundation and that $3.5 million grant from the state. And then lastly, I mentioned earlier the $3.2 million of debt service payments that are due on our debt certificates coming due in fiscal year 27. So that will also be funded by a transfer from the district's operating funds. So in total, we're budgeting another $14 million to be transferred from operating fund balance reserves to non-operating funds during the next year. Okay, so I'll pause again here quickly to just see if there's any questions on expenditure portion of the budget.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Brian, to see if I'm understanding correctly? So on the expenditure side, so I'm looking at in the packet, this is marked CFC packet page 18, but it's the balance sheet detail. So it looks like expenditures are, ignoring construction, expenditures are expected to increase 3.24%. Is that accurate?
Yes, when compared to the fiscal year 26 budget, yes.
Compared to the fiscal year 26 budget, I got it, or 5.4% when compared to the estimated actual. And then if
Right.
you go back a couple slides to the similar slide on revenues, we're anticipating an increase of 12% or about $13 million in revenues. Is that also correct? That's CFC packet page 13.
Yes, that is correct also.
Okay.
Yep, and just a reminder though, that increase in revenues is a little bit, I don't want to say artificially inflated, but inflated because of the two big grants projected to come in for the year.
Which may or may not
Correct.
come in during this particular fiscal year. Okay, all right, thank you.
I have a question on project 2 funding.
we've got the $1.5 million donation here. I think we're attributing the $3.5 million grant to the foundation as well. I think we had prior foundation contributions in previous years. Scott, what's the total funding that we're at for the foundation? I feel like, was it 12 million was our target total for the project?
Yeah, target's 12.5. Believe we've received 5 in total. Is that correct? I believe 5 total.
Yeah, that sounds right, but I'd want to double check.
And then 5 more.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Sorry.
This might have been more relevant when we were talking about property taxes, but how much cash does the district have on hand? Cause I know you said that property taxes might be very delayed to like keep having like all of our expenses, like all of our operating expenses like going before like we run into like an issue.
Yeah, so it really varies. Obviously we have the most on hand right after those taxes come in. That could be, for the upcoming year, I would say, we could be looking at cash on hand right after taxes arrive of 60 to 70 million. But then obviously that kind of trickles down as we're waiting and biding our time till the next batch comes in. When it gets delayed, the low point, can get down to, we always have a certain amount of funding that we leave liquid, in cash so that we can cover our bills as they're coming due. And then the challenge we have is kind of playing the game as to, okay, how much can we afford to have locked up in investments to earn as much capital as we can with that money while still protecting ourselves against a future delay in taxes. So that's where that staggering effect kind of comes into place, to where, if everything was happening normally at the county and we were seeing tax money in July and August, we will set some of our investments to mature in August, September, October, and so on, just to cover ourselves, to where if that delay lasts 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, we still have investments that are maturing and turning into cash so that we can pay that month's bills.
I have 3 fairly minor things. One, I just want to clarify what you said about the outsourced student aid. The goal is try to hire them internally is what I heard, and that in this amount is just being put in there as a contingency if you're unable to, as opposed to you've already know that you can't fill them.
Yes, every attempt will definitely be made to hire internally.
And then the second one is on the budget expenditure by object pie chart. I would recommend for this year, because it is so skewed by construction, to show that pie chart with or without construction in a future presentation to the board, because it makes comparing the 2 pie charts basically meaningless with that construction in there. And on the revenue side, sort of the same thing, you might want to do one with or without the federal sources, just because those skew things. Yeah, you can look at the numbers, but if you're presenting a pie chart, might as well sort of make more sense if that is included. And then the final question I had, and maybe I'll wait till we talk about now. You mentioned something about the contract being ratified. My understanding is, what is the actual state of that? It's going to be voted on at the 25th, but there's been internal ratification. What's the status?
The union ratified it on or about June 1st, and then at our last board meeting on June 11th, the board ratified it. So it's fully ratified.
Okay, I didn't remember a public vote on June 11th.
It was the
It was a
special
special
meeting.
It was in a special
It
meeting.
was a special meeting after the other meeting. Okay, I missed that on the agenda. It's okay. I just was like, yeah, when did that happen? So that's been approved, and so then presumably at the going back to the timeline here, the August 6th presentation to the board would include the updated 5-year projections and updated salaries with the new contract.
It's gonna be the most exciting
Yes.
update to this report that's gonna come in August, because by that time you'll have a chance to incorporate that new agreement. Yes.
Hopefully it's not exciting and you already have a sense of what it will look like. All right, that was, just wanted to clarify whether or not there actually was a vote. I had missed the fact that there was a contract. All right,
Yeah, you had to stay up late for that one, Bob.
well, had to leave and then. It's fine.
Brian, I had a couple of questions. First, this is really easy to understand, so I just wanted to thank you for the way that you laid it out and explain it. We had talked about, I think, a year ago about building maintenance. So this is, I'm still on your page 19. So you have 6 million of building maintenance. So how does this fit into a long-term plan? Because I think we talked about having some, you know, standards and goals and whatnot.
So we, as we. I think the best way I can describe this is, when we updated our 10-year capital improvement plan, you know, we've always got our 4 main lenses that we look at it, you know, are there projects, you know, improving the accessibility of the building for students? What kind of sustainability impact do they have? Is it, something's end of life and it's a must do, or is there, you know, savings we can realize because if we're going to say replace ceiling tiles and we might look at the lights while we're up there. We recently, over the last couple of years, have started to incorporate not just the architect feedback in this 10-year capital plan, but then also our construction manager with Bill Bain to make sure that our pricing is you know, pretty short up and accurate, that what we're estimating the project would cost is what they would cost. This year, we had the added wrinkle of then double checking that, you know, are we doing any work that, if Act 3 was to go forward and get approved, that we would either then be, you know, undoing work that we recently paid for, or that, you know, that we'd be double dipping and doing that work in that project. We looked at all those areas, found, you know, the most you know, needed areas we had to address in the building, what kept us on our planned maintenance schedules in terms of corridor improvement and tuck pointing. So I would say that the number here, and it's unique because this number won't match any of the actual numbers in the CIP plan, because it's, you know, when you start work in June and finish it in August, it's split between 2 fiscal years. But that work has been, you know, really, it was an area we looked at and scaled back a little bit in terms of our, you know, are any of these projects wants, you know, are there more efficient ways to do some of the work? The other thing that we have started to incorporate now is we've got a very skilled maintenance staff in the building, and there's work that we can self-perform and not have to pay the architects a fee to design lights in a hallway, because we can buy the lights and put ourselves in-house. So kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but you know, that was the approach we took this year to make sure that we're not deferring maintenance and, you know, kicking the can down the road, but then also not doing more than we could fiscally handle.
Okay, so where could I see the schedule of deferred maintenance and how this is, you know, slotted in there and on a long-term plan?
Trying to remember the month it was on the board. I can look it up and email it to you. I believe it was April.
I was gonna say May, but it was very recent.
Yes, it's either the April or the May board meeting. There's it gets presented to the Board of Education, the full 10-year capital improvement plan, both the very detailed documents and then the summary pages as well.
Okay, Great, that's helpful. So I won't have any more comments on that till I look at that. So I'm looking at, you know, we're not all the way through here yet, but I am looking at this Act 3, $750,000. And I guess I'm wondering how we're juxtaposing that amount with the amount we're spending on actual education. So I guess I'm trying to think about, you know, the board has certain goals, you know, which they've identified. And what I see here is a fiscally responsible presentation, but I don't see it connected to the goals. So if I was to do that, then I would really question the $750,000 when you look at the salaries, really, you know, salaries and benefits, they really haven't changed, right? The benefit cost is going up, so we're gonna be, you know, doing more of that, but the salaries themselves and people behind it hasn't really changed at all. So I guess what's the approach here?
My take, and then Dr. Johnson, feel free to supplement here. I think, you know, when we talk about the board's goals, and then we think back to the larger EBF presentation that was made, that is an area that Dr. Hester has referenced in multiple presentations that, you know, you won't see, say, the instructional coaches in this budget, but that's because she's taking this year to build out the model that she finds the most effective for students in her role. And those positions have been then earmarked for the following budget to come back. It's I think a difficult undertaking to connect the education, how do I say this, the planned use from each division in their budgets and you know, where they are allotting these dollars and choosing to spend those dollars. It's trying to think how we would kind of broach that in a presentation to kind of connect the fiscal budget to you know, to what those dollars actually equate to.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add to that is what you're seeing is a function of where we have been with the facilities work over time compared to where we are since the most recent EBF conversation that we've had here in March and April, right, at CFC and at the board too. So the concept schematic design for Act 3 is something that goes back a year plus, right? That process is something that's been mapped out. And we have earmarked in the budget in anticipation of these various conversations down the road. After board discussion for a potential future referendum date, which is a future conversation, right? In April, right, this coming year. The EBF report that zeroed in on some specific areas for improvement, specifically two which you mentioned right there, are ones that, you know, relatively speaking, we've had a short window, right, to figure out exactly where that's going to go. So those are items that are very much on our radar, but what you're seeing right now is what the budget has been able to be at this point.
So that's a very, you know, unsatisfactory answer. I'm very disappointed to hear that. I think that that's fine that, you know, there are some long-standing plans for construction that has, so that's a priority that you're stating, that is a priority. And by not addressing the gap that we have with our students this year, I just don't see how you could, I'm very confused. Like, you're just doing the same thing that you did last year. And so we have this gap. So maybe I'm rephrasing my question. What are we doing to help students now?
Yeah, so there's all sorts of work that we're doing on a regular basis to help our students. And to suggest in some way that because we haven't responded to an EDF report that we got in March, right? That significantly changes the percentage of adequacy in areas from what we had done previously when we were allocating our team on previous years. And I think for good reasons. I think it was good that we had done that. To suggest that and somebody implied that we aren't doing things for kids to help to kind of improve outcomes is I don't understand that the slightest, frankly. We're doing all sorts of curriculum, all sorts of work helping to support students and enroll in and find success in honors in the highest level class we possibly can across the board. We've done significant work with our math curriculum over the past few years. We know the work we've done with our freshman curriculum. And so I appreciate the urgency, and I think the urgency is real. But nonetheless, you know, the areas that have been identified here for us to primarily focus on have been the instructional facilitators, right, for professional development, and the broader category of kind of core intervention grad support, which is, you talked about that in the report, I think, in terms of kind of loosely as tutoring, but there's other things, right, where that could look like small group and field work and so on. So those are areas that are important, but those two areas aren't the only things that we're focusing on to help improve outcomes for kids in school, of course.
So I would just say that the EBF model has been around since 2017, so it's not really about like the March presentation. And really, you don't even need the EBF model. I mean, this research has been out for decades. So it's more that what I'm seeing is no change in budget, because again, what you spend your money on are your values. Except for I am seeing change in buildings and capital. So when I see that the student outcomes are not changing and some are going down, then I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'm not suggesting that we don't care about kids. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that what we have been doing has not met their needs, and that the urgency is there, and that is like a value from the community. It's not like a personal opinion, you know.
And I just want to contend that the statement that we are not meeting their students' needs, or we aren't seeing positive growth in student outcomes, isn't supported by generally what we are seeing with our students across the board. So, and I don't mean to be, you know, back and forth with you in this way. We certainly have challenges as a school district, but I think we have to be careful about, you know, implying in some way that we aren't thoroughly investing in positive outcomes.
I'd also like to
test scores then, because that
I'd also like to throw in the fact that, you know, the Act 3 design development isn't a change. I mean, that's been projected for multiple years. This money would be being spent. It is now being line item, but it's not like this hasn't been planned and budgeted for multiple years. So it's not a change in the same way of they're increasing something versus what they have been planning to do for a long time. And I think that that's an important part of things too.
So then we're planning for a long time for construction. We're not planning for a long time for.
I'm not going to.
Again, the framing of that is we are not planning to improve outcomes for kids. That's just, it's.
I'm just saying that, so it's not necessarily just a District 200 issue. A lot of times what districts do, and you know, start the presentation out saying zero-based budgeting. So a lot of times you go back and you're doing historically, you're matching what you did before. And what I'm saying is to meet the moment where it's going to take a different allocation of resources. And it's not even just about like, oh, let's increase the money in this. That's not what I'm saying either. I'm saying let's be more targeted, because there are a lot of students who are not being, their needs are not being met.
We have work to do. I don't disagree there at all.
I think these are valid points from both points of view. There are actually some things in motion right now, and have been since April, that I think Kathleen and I need to just get everybody caught up on. I will say that if the board votes to approve for that 750K on design development, it's not as though that's 750K that would not have otherwise been spent on teaching or learning. I think the work on that end of things is more around program design going on right now. So Kathleen and I will get multiple things in motion, multiple stakeholders on this. We'll make sure to get everybody caught up to speed, get aligned here in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, just to clarify, only 64% of our students are meeting math proficiency levels.
Great. I mean, I understand your point, right? There is work to be done, and if anything that I've said today seems to suggest that we don't have that work to do as a school district, I have absolutely miscommunicated. We have work to do. What I am saying is that we are already investing quite a bit in programs, curriculums, support, resources, how we function as a school generally, how our teachers collaborate, what they're looking at, professional development for our teachers to help improve those outcomes. So my real stress is that we be careful about the language that we use to suggest that we aren't doing something, which is what I heard. We aren't doing something to, support our kids. We are fully invested. I think that's a responsible argument for us to continue to make as a district.
Okay, I think I'll just end with, professional learning communities have been around for 25 years. So it's not like, oh, we didn't know about instructional coaches, we have to take a year to think about how to do that. That doesn't really make sense to me. I think, if it's culture change, it is what it is. That's the reality here, fine. But I think that there are students this year who are going to be falling behind again, even more. And it's very strange to me that we can't get money for tutors when we can sort of find $750,000 to do whatever this is.
That's a very precise point, right? I understand that, right? I understand you calling that out. I think there's value in that conversation. It's just a broader language when we talk about it, that as a school district, we're gonna want to engage in a little bit, but I understand that. I understand your point.
Maybe I'll just follow up and say it's not really a case that we can't quote find some money for tutors. It's more of a program design issue at the moment, which is the reason that I said that, if the board were to approve this 750K, it doesn't mean that that's somehow subtracting from unequal deployment
That's right.
on the teaching and learning side.
Any other comments, questions before I move forward? All right. Okay, so I've got a couple more slides here. So how does what's the bigger picture of the budget's impact on fund balance? Slide 14's got a lot of numbers on it, but this kind of tells the story, I think, especially for us finance type people. Total operating funds are shown in the top half of the slide, and if we move from left to right, the operating funds are expected to start the year at around $34 million. Then we have revenues budgeted to exceed expenditures by $15 million. But then there are transfers of $14 million, which are highlighted in blue, going to the non-operating funds. So those transfers carry down to the lower half of the slide, with $11 million going towards capital projects and $3 million for debt service. Then back up on the top right, highlighted in green, we have an operating fund balance at the end of fiscal year 27, projected at $35 million. And that equates to roughly 35% of operating expenditures. And then I always like to tie in, as a reminder that our fund balance policy targets a range of 25 to 50%. So the fiscal year 27 budget is positioning us nicely within that range. So what's changed since the last projection? As we compile our budget, we also perform a look back to the previous 5-year projection. And that gives us a sense of where this year, the upcoming year's budget may differ from what we were thinking in the year before. I've bulleted some of those differences here, but I'm actually going to advance to the next slide as I kind of talk through them, because I think you'll have a better visual of some of these particular budget areas with the color coding. So starting with operating funds, our revenues did not have any notable changes from the previous projection, and in total, they were only about 0.5% different. On the expenditure section, the salary and employee benefits lines, which are highlighted in gray, are coming in under the projection due to a staffing reduction of 5 FTE and the decrease in the district's contribution rate for IMRF. We kind of touched on this already, but for that staffing reduction, that change is expected to be temporary, as at least some of those positions will likely return in the following year after our student learning department has a chance to kind of determine that most effective way to reboot the instructional coaching program. Highlighted in blue is the line for supplies and materials. Those expenses are less than projected, thanks to the savings we're seeing from our new electricity contract that was facilitated by our buildings and grounds department. Then in orange, the equipment budget is also less than projected. Within this category, we determined that we could extend the life of some of our assets, in particular a bus and some copiers and printers, by an additional year than what was previously expected. So that again is a bit of a temporary savings, but we're conducting that type of analysis on our big ticket purchases on a year-to-year basis, so that we're optimizing the useful life out of them as much as we can. The other objects, which are highlighted in yellow, is one item where the budgeted expenses are coming in more than the projection. That change includes 2 sets of increases that were not planned for in our projection. The first we talked about a little earlier, that was the growth in the number of outplaced special education students, so that bumped up tuition costs. And then the second is a proposed revision to an intergovernmental agreement for early childhood services. That would result in about $60,000 of additional expenses for D200 next year that we did not have built into last year's projection. When we last presented the 5-year financial projection, it was noted that the district would need to target a $400,000 reduction in fiscal year 27 expenditures in order to maintain a 33% fund balance to expense ratio. Tony was kind of talking about this at the beginning of the presentation. In this preliminary version of the budget, total expenditures are nearly $1 million less than last year's projection. Some of that savings, as I said before, is temporary, within personnel and equipment. So our work is certainly not done from a long-range financial planning perspective, but it is a step in the right direction for the district's financial outlook. And I think we will, see the impact of that when the financial projections get updated for August. The other thing that's working in our favor in this comparison is the beginning fund balance is projected to be about $2 million higher than planned, because as of now, our fiscal year 26 expenses are running under budget. So if that holds true, and we combine that with the savings from the fiscal year 27 budget, our fund balance to expenditure ratio, which is shown in green down at the bottom of the slide, is up about 3% from where it was in the last projection. Moving over to the non-operating funds, the revenues here are nearly $2 million higher than projected. And that's because we had assumed 2 million of the state grant for Project 2 would be received in fiscal year 26. Since that was not the case, we now have the full amount of that grant budgeted as revenue in fiscal year 27, instead of it being split between multiple fiscal years. In the expenditure section, the variance highlighted in blue for Project 2 is a timing difference in billing between fiscal years. So that is not an increase in the total project cost. It is just a shift in payments essentially between the year we're wrapping up now and the year the project concludes next year. The amount in gold for Act 3 is for that design development work by the architects. Although this expense had been planned for, for in previous years, our past practice had always been not to actually add that amount into the financial projection for design and construction work until the board had actually been presented with cost information for consideration. So that's why you see a difference on that line. At the time the last financial projection was prepared, Act 3 was still very early in the conceptual design phase. Then at the bottom of the slide, the non-operating fund balance at the end of fiscal year 27 is higher than what was previously projected because the Imagine Foundation is currently $500,000 ahead of the donations they were predicted to have turned over to us by this point. So every year, as we're having budget conversations, we tend to have this similar set of unknowns that we're making assumptions on. But this year, the tax incentives associated with the geothermal project is a new one for our list. So I've called out this item first, mainly because of the amount of revenue we're talking about and the potential impact it could have on our financial position if that money is delayed. If we removed the tax incentive entirely from the budget, the district's fund balance to expenditure ratio would drop to 26.5% by June 30, 2027. That percentage is still within the 25 to 50% fund balance policy range, but obviously it puts us below the 33% we've been targeting in our financial projections, at least temporarily until the incentive does arrive. It also leaves less wiggle room for navigating scenarios such as the second bullet point, where Cook County delays property tax bills like they will be again this fall. So, just to reiterate, as of today, the belief is that we will get that revenue in fiscal year 27, which is why it's included in the budget. But since we're still in the very early stages of the tax compliance work that'll need to occur, I wanted to be fully transparent here with the committee about, how our fiscal outlook could potentially change as of June 30, if that timeline or the actual incentive amount deviates from our current expectation. The rest of this list we've already kind of touched on, but just to recap, the new faculty senate contract, the 2027 health insurance renewal, and then any summer movement we might see in our special education student outplacements have the greatest potential to alter the budget between now and September. So as always, I'll continue to monitor those things, provide updates to both the committee and the board as we're kind of moving through the last few months of the budgeting process. So, more information to continue to come there in August and even in September if needed. So with that, I will open it up for any remaining questions and discussion.
I have a comment and a question. I thank you very much for including the projected fund balance if the geothermal money doesn't come through. I hadn't seen that on my first pass, and one of my questions was going to be, did you look at that? And the answer is it's in your PowerPoint. I should have read more closely, but I appreciate that transparency and the noting that it is still above the guideline, even if that money doesn't come in, is very reassuring. Other thing is when the 5-year projections are done again, District 97, I assume this is still possible, the software used to have low point fund balance as part of the graph for and I think that given that the county is again playing issues with when they send out the bills, I think that could be a very useful line to have in the projections and perhaps model it with a couple of different dates in there of, taxes come in September, taxes come in December, and see whether or not there are potential cash flow issues either, probably not this year, potentially in future years.
Thank you. I've noted that.
Right. No more questions here on the preliminary budget for FY 27. That brings us then to item B for preliminary Act 3 finance discussion. I know it wasn't anything in the packet that was just to the board Thursday.
Yeah, this was just a kind of a preliminary discussion, something that'll probably be actually a heavier discussion item, as we get into conversations when we come back after the summer. But the Board of Education was presented the preliminary estimates for schematic design. The final estimates from schematic design, the numbers pre full design of the project with PD, and it was segmented out in a manner that there were prices. If you followed the Act 3 conversations, there were prices and studies done on the 2 auditoriums of what it would take to fully renovate those. What we have found is the early estimate of the construction cost to be $56.3 million in today's dollars, not including the auditorium renovations. When you add in escalation and contingency, and then the indirect costs, so your reimbursables, the architect fees, construction manager fees, that number comes down to $74.8 million. And then when you add in the remaining fees and furniture, the estimated cost for this project to break ground in a few years would be $84.6 million. The 2 auditoriums totaled $2.4 million in renovations, but that's work we feel that could be woven into our 10-year capital maintenance plan in a future iteration. So wanted to share these updates with the CFC, and then Graham, you had mentioned a preliminary talk on funding discussions, so wanted to kind of kick it over to you as well.
So the report that the board got appears in the board books for June 11th. And as Tony mentioned, we were kind of waiting to see what the budget would look like for Project 3, which is termed Act 3. And as you just heard, it's a $84.6 million price tag. I I feel like there's board consensus that the only possible way to do a project like this is to go to the community for referendum capital bonds. If that were to occur, the soonest opportunity it's going to be the municipal elections of spring of 2027. So between now and then, if the board approves the next stage of analysis, that would be the design development phase, which is a refinement of the engineering and the drawings and so forth. And then what needs to run concurrently with that, with the CFC's active help, is assessing what that potential bond issuance might look like. For example, term of the bond, expected interest rates. I know you all have your dog-eared patterned copies of the board atlas, but more than a year ago, we added to it a visualization tool for what CapEx spending might look like as a total percentage of a tax levy. And I think that's useful to understand what does it cost to continuously invest in infrastructure over time. And ideally under bond issuance conditions where current and future taxpayers of such a bond issuance are also the users and beneficiaries of that infrastructure. So I was just updating that tool, and I'll tinker with it as well. It'll come out again in the forthcoming issuance of the board atlas. But these are going to be the things we're going to seek CFC guidance and ideas and thoughts on. That's my summary of what we're looking at, where we are at this moment. CFC members have any comments or questions, we welcome that. Otherwise, that's about all we have to say on that topic.
I think that's going to be important to consider when we review the upcoming meeting schedules.
Absolutely, I flagged that very same issue. Yeah, and that's a function of when does the information become available, and I think it was initially thought it might come out as soon as April, but we just didn't have to get it until this past week.
I know Elizabeth is waiting for his call. I talked to her March 7th. And she didn't know I had phase 3, so she's probably waiting for your call still.
Yep.
All right, then, so that's just a brief overview then for the upcoming, so we decided to see the proposed 2026-2027 community finance committee meeting dates for the future. Also, so we're on 1 year of renewals, so they go through July 31st, if I recall correctly. So we want to let Lisa know for the next fiscal year 81 to the next school year, basically. If you're going to renew for another year, I already informed Brian and Tony that I'm not renewing, so this will be my last week. So but if you guys are planning to renew, the one email Lisa, right? Or Carmen, I don't know which one, both. Yeah. Lisa and Carmen, email them if you're interested in renewing, that way they can put out the notice for at least my spot and anybody else's renew. For the replacement. Which Graham I know gets involved in, and Tony will be.
Yeah,
Lead that charge when they have applicants come in.
and if anybody's thinking they were planning to step down, the sooner the better, just as it allows us to interview multiple candidates and post one posting. Would hate to upset somebody if say they weren't selected if we were down to 2 candidates, but if we had 2 open seats, we would have selected them. And then what will happen at our first meeting in August, our co-chair will open the meeting. we will have the board, prior to that meeting, vote to, approve and, the new membership. And then, the committee will vote on, chair and co-chair at the August 11th meeting.
Obviously, as I said, if we have to change those like August, October, November meetings.
Yeah,
Some
so
stuff with
you
the
know,
other parts.
we'll be excited to receive all the applications from interested community members who want to participate on this August body. With regard to these dates, I talked to Lisa, and these are just placeholders. She just plugged in what we did last year, knowing that we'd have a chance to discuss here live what dates make the most sense. It's probably neither here nor there. I'll be absent the August 11th meeting, but that's fine. This would be around the time that we would theoretically welcome in the new member or members. And then also this syncs up with the next iteration of the budget, right, Tony?
Yes.
Okay. So it probably makes sense to keep that.
I was wondering if we potentially would want to push that up to August 4th. And then it would be before the committee of the whole, so that our comments could be input to the committee of the whole discussion on August 6th. Also, I will be out of town on August 11th, but I'm not suggesting moving for that reason.
Who else is gonna be missing August 11th? Do we even have a quorum? All right, so it's just me and Bob. Okay,
The only issue I would see in pushing that up on a week early was if we do it before the committee of the whole, there may not be time then for the board to authorize a new member to join. Where we could theoretically present that at the COW and have it approved at the special. There is though, what we can do is take the feedback from the CFC in between the two meetings, compile it, provide it to the Board of Education prior to that August vote, and then there also will be time to really share that feedback in between the two meetings as well.
So do we have a calendar of what goes with what dates? Because it didn't seem to really work this time around where there was like that big,
we're getting there.
oh,
100%, I agree with you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so my other notation is, I believe that if the district were to approve a referendum for the spring 2027 ballot, that decision has to be made in December. To me, that, you know, October 13th, November 10th seems okay, but I don't know if that means, you know, should we also be meeting a little bit later in the month of November? Just thinking out loud here.
Does anyone know what's the deadline for the referendum ballot language?
I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, but it is in December.
It's just, okay.
It's a number of days before the election, because the election moves. It's
Right.
not a fixed date as much as X number of days before the April election.
Okay.
And also, what is the timing for the board levy approval? In December, and any public hearings around that, because, you know, again, last year we were discussing about the, for lack of a better word, the recapture. Want to make sure that conversation was happening before the board's levy conversation.
Yeah, that I would anticipate, you know, it's been my preference to line that up to where the levy hearing and approval is done at the first meeting in December, just because that way if we do run into any issues, we're not scrambling to schedule an extra meeting and meet, you know, legal deadlines to file the levy. It gives us that little bit of extra cushion.
And what is the first meeting in December, given that December 24th is Thursday?
Our first meeting in December is the 3rd, which is our committee of the whole. And then our regular meeting in December is the 17th.
And the November meetings would be the 5th and the 19th?
Yes.
So if we followed that same cycle as the year before, that would mean levy adoption that first week of December, and then working backwards, tentative levy going to the board that first meeting in November, and then likely discussion at the CFC level in October.
Okay, so does October 13th come late enough in the month of October? To let CFC weigh in on the levy?
Yes.
And November 10th, is that still a good, hearing none, I think, so the issue, that I also noted along with Michelle is, so this year, it turned out to be kind of a problem to have this 3-month gap between January and April and not have CFC. So do we want to push January a little bit later, bump the April one a little bit up? Take the November meeting and stick it in the spring? Okay, what do we think makes sense here?
I will just recollect that as we discussed funding options for project 2, I felt like there were several additional meetings that we added to the calendar through that process in order for the CFC to have time to deliberate and to bring perspective or recommendations to the board. So there were extra meetings that fall, I seem to recall.
Yes.
Yeah. Quite a few extra meetings
Extra CFC meetings? Yes, yeah,
Correct.
last fall.
in the,
Not the
no, all of 22.
Yeah.
Leading up to the project 2 funding decision.
Okay, so your idea is, we do 6 meetings right now, but maybe we can do 9 or 10 meetings.
I
Let's-
definitely want to clarify, that's not my idea. Nor my point, no, my point was though, that we did on the fly schedule a couple of additional CFC meetings when additional conversational time was needed. Around that particular funding process. Not 9 or 10.
This would be a little different. That was, we were waiting more about the options. Sounds like you have. Just that's what this is. So that's what this is.
Okay, so I'd probably leave the 3 in the fall, given that, that's when the bulk of the discussion will occur, leading up to a December decision. But that 3-month void in the spring, with or without a referendum year, or a debt issuance year, that was a little problematic, so I wonder about either pushing January into February to make it less. I mean, theoretically, that's still a 3-month now from November to February, but part of that's through the holidays. So you guys want to move or add? Do we want to do 7 meetings?
part of the problem, of course, is spring break. I mean, it's, you have winter break and spring break, and that's where you end up with having it be very difficult to figure out how to schedule this. Also, what and this may have to be something we discuss after we better understand the timing, is I'm assuming, if I remember the timetable right from last week, the construction isn't going to start for like another year after the referendum passes. And so therefore, there isn't going to be any urgency on issuing bonds shortly after the referendum passes. So having a meeting immediately after the referendum doesn't seem necessary, so maybe moving that April meeting up to mid-March might make some more sense.
One plus April or add a seventh meeting?
Spring break is that last week of.
Yeah.
April.
Right, so
So
that'll be
like
part
2
of
weeks
the
before that.
It'd have to be May or March 16th, I think, because they also wouldn't want it the week of the board meeting. I'm assuming that'd be a lot for administrators.
I think we can move the April meeting in March.
Okay, here's a definitive statement from Pete or Steve Miller. So copy that, Mr. Chairman. Everybody okay with that?
Your final duty, right? Yeah.
Making the final decision on a meeting you won't be attending.
So you also could, when you elect new chairs and stuff, you can make that decision on as well to change the meeting.
Yeah.
We might have other ideas. So. Well, just to know, you guys can do. January, February, staffing, does, yeah, for executive sessions before April. So.
Yeah, it goes to the board in February.
Goes to the board, okay, yes, that's what January meeting is for, so you can go to January.
That's right. Yeah, we need the gym.
Yeah, I mean, the January one for the staffing. So, Saturday, you mentioned that. But you got the year also, that's fine.
All right, so April 20th becomes March 16th. Are we voting on that tonight, or how do we do this?
Very least, we need to vote on the August 11th one, because otherwise there's no meeting between now and that meeting.
Okay.
I don't think we've ever voted on the meeting dates.
Yeah,
that's possible
Yeah,
too.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
We just put this tentative, and you look at them. Make sure they work. Friday, so it'll be something that works as of April 30th, no one, any questions on them?
Before we adjourn, I just want to take a minute and thank Greg for all the years of service here. I think when we were talking before the meeting, he has actually been in the district, what was it, 8 years on this board is what we were guessing. And
Steve, you remember?
I don't.
But it was the advisory part.
Yeah, me and Steve were like. when we
Well, it's
brought
tough for
back-
me to know, because like I kind of transitioned from doing the financial projections professionally to then serving on the committee as a resident when that transition.
so just want to say thank you for all the service, wish you best of luck, and as you trade in, and I've got to throw this in, I thought about this, I liked it, clean audits for dirty diapers, I wish you all the best, so. Best of luck.
Yes, because I'm having a kid in October, that's why I'm stepping down, so dad duty over. My nights will be busy. So I don't wanna be leaving the wife by herself for too long. All right. With that,
Anything else you'd like to say? Rick?
no.
Okay, that's really.
I might come down to take a look just for.
Bring the baby.
Yeah.
Bring the baby.
Good idea. I guess you really don't need the future, item plus the 6, the future agenda next steps. Yeah, do that in August. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn? Second, all right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries.